What is that one thing that you find just so fascinating when it comes to what you're doing, being a part of that, the head of that municipality when it comes to these liens? Like, what is that one thing you see all the time that's just really getting your gears and driving you when it comes to this stuff?
Seeing the impact that we can make, and somebody, coming in and realizing that they have, hey, I got $130,000 lien on this property, and the property is maybe worth 50,000, and being able to help that family out to recognize that we can actually come to an agreement, bring the property into compliance, because our ultimate goal is not to be punitive, but to actually get compliance and bring that property back on the market, or at least, safe housing, decent housing, and, for the neighborhood, a safety, place for the neighborhood. So when we are able to, take those liens and do those reductions for those families, it's huge, because they see it overwhelming, and then it becomes a snowball for them. Like, they figure out that they could never get ahead of it. And when I come and have those discussions with families, I mean, they're leaving my office and they're crying and they're thankful, and they're so appreciative, because they're, that fear of having that over their house goes away. If we just have a conversation, if you just speak to someone, they'll get to understand that the liens are not the ultimate. What our real goal is always going to be is compliance. And that's our ultimate goal. So getting them to do that, that's a win. It's a win-win for everybody.
Yeah, I love that approach. I mean, that's an incredible approach, because that's what you want. You want to be able to help and facilitate and get everybody to the table together, which is what a lot of people that are buying, investors, realtors that have these situations, want that mentality. And we hope that that's where it is in every municipality. So, Glen, let's start from the beginning. Walk us through, how does it even begin? You guys are out and about. Y'all are driving. Maybe you see the grass is really tall, or, maybe there's a lot of shrubbery in the front, or, how does the process begin by the identification of how it all starts? What are you looking for?
So particularly in Lake County, and within Lake County, we have 14 other municipalities. So I'm going to speak about the unincorporated portions. And this throughout the state, it's going to vary. So, but for our particular jurisdiction, we don't have the staff to be proactive. So we're not proactive per se. A lot of these complaints are coming into us. Just last year, Senate Bill 60 was signed into law, where we no longer take anonymous complaints. And so with that, we're driven by complaints coming into our office with someone actually providing a name and an address. And that's per statute. And so once we get those complaints, and then we go out there and we investigate. So if there's something adjacent that has the similar situation, or it's a violation, then we address those as well, because we're in the neighborhood and it's our job to do that as well. And so when we get a complaint on one particular property, we're also assessing the neighboring properties to make sure that they're also in compliance. Once we find that there is a violation, we try to notify the property owners. Once we notify the property owners, we work with them to try to bring that property into compliance. This can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 3 to 4 months before we actually go to hearing, and we'll provide a notice for hearing, so that there's an extensive due process that goes into place to get that done. Once we have no communication with the folks, or they're just not complying, or not trying to bring the property into compliance, then it leaves us no choice but to go to before a public hearing. That public hearing is going to have a magistrate. In some municipalities, you're going to have a board, or some of them will also have both. That magistrate is also most likely going to give that the respondent an opportunity to bring that property into compliance. If they fail to do it at that point, typically you're going to see that, on whatever day that the magistrate provides for them, that last day, it starts to accrue fines. And those fines will accumulate very quickly because it's on an accrual basis per day. So depending on what the fines in our municipality, it typically ranges between $100 to $500, depending on what the severity of the issue is. Most of them are going to be in that $100 range, but that's still $3,000 a month in fines. No one wants to be at that. But the goal is compliance. And so once that reaches a certain amount, then we typically go ahead and record that. And we also send a notice to the respondent again to let them know, hey, you didn't come into compliance. We do have an order of fine that was signed by the magistrate. And before that's recorded, we still give them an opportunity where they can contest it to say, oh, I didn't know. Let me take care of it now. So the opportunities are there. So by the time it's recorded, it's gone through an extensive due process system, so that then that lien becomes valid, and that lien is now good for 20 years until that property is either in compliance or the liens are paid off, or we come into an agreement and settlement agreement to reduce it to get it off. So that's the process building up to that lien. And we typically will not negotiate a lien release until that property is in compliance. That's the whole goal. The whole goal is to have that compliance.
How do you work through some of the more complicated probates that come through when you get when a deal comes in the office? Like, what kind of systems and things are going through your mind to try to figure it out and solve it? Maybe through the title end or through other things, procedures you can do?
Yeah, I like how you bring up title, and like the way I think about things sometimes, it's like, who's checking our work, right? It's like who do we have to do this for? Like what is the hang up? And that's it a lot of times, right? Is title, right? Like, what do they need to see to prove that this person has authority to complete this transaction? And sometimes title, they're more conservative, right? If they're issuing a title policy, sometimes what they want is actually maybe like, for example, what I've seen happen a lot in Arizona, if the deed says husband and wife, period, is husband and wife, period, there is a presumption that it's right of survivorship.
Okay.
Meaning that their interest goes to the other. But it's written a little bit confusing. So I see some title companies, they'll want to probate because it says husband and wife and doesn't include the words rights of survivorship.
Really?
Yeah. Less now, but I've been able to get people to explain the statute, because there's a presumption against, right? So by default, it's a tenancy in common, so no rights of survivorship.
With husband and wife?
But if it says the words husband and wife, that is enough.
Okay, yeah.
But sometimes their legal department or whatever it is just kind of like. And then other times too, it's like one that comes up. I don't know if you've seen this or dealt with it. What if they can't find the trust? Have you had that? Like the house is in trust, because the deed is there and that was recorded.
Right.
But no one has a copy of this trust. Then what do you do?
Yeah. So we saw one of those cases. It never actually materialized where they wanted to pursue it. Because, when you get those where there's no trust, properties titled in a trust, and where is it? It gets complicated. You almost have to recreate it based on facts and circumstances and through affidavits of heirs, through the whole lineage. And one of I just did a video on this, like they'll all see it whenever it comes out. But two of the things that you can look up just in case you have a situation of no trust, we found this, is certificates of trust and abstracts of trust. So what we realize is sometimes the estate planning attorneys, when they do those, they'll record it. And so if you can't find the trust or you don't know who the trustee is, pull the public record of the recording documents, and the certificate may tell you who the trustee is or who the beneficiaries are in short form. And the abstract is what it basically sounds like. It's kind of a shortened version of what the trust is, and it could name the successors and beneficiaries. The thing that we see a lot, and it materializes, it comes out frequently, is the successor trustees not being nominated, right? Like it'll name the entity, it'll name the person that had the trust as person that created it, and then it'll name the corporation as the successor trustee, but then they don't name any other successors. So, people think, oh, trust avoid probate, but now that you don't have somebody that's going to serve, because the corporation doesn't want to serve unless it's a $10 million asset and it's a $100,000 house, now you got to appoint somebody. Now what are they doing? Coming back to us.
So once someone passes away, even a revocable trust becomes irrevocable.
Right.
So there's a statute in Arizona that provides for it, and attorneys came up with it like in New York. Jonathan Blotmacher, I don't know if you've heard of him. He's kind of like an old school estate planning. He was one of my dad's heroes, basically. He created a lot of these. I think it was like Jackie Onassis's attorney, and in New York. But basically, the idea is that if the trustee has discretion over principle of the trust, mm-hmm. they can use that discretion to actually amend the trust or change it. So that's kind of the theory. And then states like Arizona and California have clarified that you can do that. So that's one way we can solve that problem.
Interesting.
So we can have decanting is a way where you can pour from one trust, into another one. So we can clean up those problems if needed.
Interesting. Yeah, because in Florida they have the revocable, irrevocable, right? And the revocable, you can still mend it while that person's alive, unless they make it irrevocable. Now you're going to have to either get the court involved and get all beneficiaries involved. But then, once that person dies, it becomes irrevocable. Now to make any of those changes, you got to either get the court involved and appoint maybe one of the beneficiaries as being that trustee, or if they got to recreate the trust, you need to find out as much as you can from everybody. So it's kind of interesting, to see the two, because those issues with properties titled in trust and overcoming them rarely come up. I mean, probate obviously populates more than it does that kind of situation, but those are interesting because investors do find those types of properties.
We're building that into the software and platform that you can have direct access to the title company, so we know real time what we need to work on, because deals actually end up closing if you know real time what needs to be worked on. If you don't, and like you said, you're constantly in a state of chasing down, hey, what's next on title? If we can resolve that stuff, then guess what? Transactions close smoother, easier, faster, on time, and everybody knows real time what needs to be worked on. It's don't get me going. It's one of my biggest pet peeves of all time. I tell everybody, I'm like, I go, a closer at a title company may be working on in a calendar month 40 files. They want all 40 to close. Yours might be one of them, Al. And there's 4 things they're working on that need to be cleared up to get that thing to the finish line. And they're going to work on it, right? But they have 40 files. If Al only has 2 deals that he's trying to get to the finish line this month, and each of them are going to make them 30 grand. It's more important to Al to know real time if there's something on title that the title person's working on, that they might only get to it once out of every 40 that they're working on. But if you've got 2, you want to know real time, because you'll step in and you'll go get a payoff yourself. You'll go do this yourself, right? Well, that's what knowing what things are real time. And so we take pride in the fact that we're going to be working with national title companies that can give you real-time access to them, so those deals don't fall apart just because nobody knows what's going on. Like, that's my personal pet peeve.
Interesting. Hey, I'm with you on that. I want to know what's going on too. And like you said, sometimes investors are not just going after quantity, but they're going after quality, and they may only have a couple leads that are huge spreads. And, they don't want to keep following up, but what do? They do follow up, and they want to know what's going on, what's happening. But I can tell you, how many times I see that too with the amount of probates, like what is going on. This is an invaluable resource to the whole thing. I mean, it's like instantaneous contract, wire, transactional funding, title telling you. So are there even going to be, this is interesting too. Are there going to even be like title notes in a way? So like, let's say title comes back and it's like a messy deal. Are the notes almost going to be logged on to that specific property? So if another potential buyer comes along, they're almost put on notice about this is what came back at one title company.
Yeah, so we're talking about, we're actually going through talking about those things, working through that. Don't know how real time that is or how extensive that would be, and what's involved. But in our perfect world, yes, that those are the things that we want to make available. And again, if you've been doing it for any amount of time, everybody that sees this or is listening now, if you've been doing this for any amount of time, I know that your deals have fallen apart before at the title company. And so we just want to connect you instantly with accepted contract, boom, title's working on it, and give you real-time access to them, so that it can give you a level of comfort that, wow, I'm going to know real time if I need to step in and get my hands dirty and work on something to get this to the finish line. Like we want you to be married to the title team, because I always tell everybody, thousands of transactions deep, and then doing it for large companies to do 40, 50 homes a month. Title's the most important thing.
Absolutely.
Title's the most important. I don't see deals closed without title involved. I'm like, so So I like every time I do a 2-day blueprint training and set up the attacks 34 ways in the city for individual investors. I always tell everybody when we get to that part of the flow of getting things to the finish line, I'm like, I've never seen a deal close without title. There's been a few where they take a gamble, right? Hey, let's just close it without getting title insurance. Okay, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But 99% of the time you get title. So if 99% of the time something happens on the transaction you do, then you better be best friends with that part of the transaction. And so again, like I said, last time I'll say it, personal pet peeve. If you're not all over title and best friends with them and making sure that they know how important it is for you to know real time what's going on, then when the deal falls apart, look in the mirror.
And that's micro content right there. We're going to make sure we put that out everywhere.
I just tell my clients, Google relocation companies and call them, right? And then you build the relationships and you offer in your inventory. You've got to have a real legitimate. And I would recommend that anything that's midterm, that you do it outside of Airbnb. And most of the time, those people are also going to go into Airbnb. So the really cool thing is that you're able to actually build out your own fees and charge your own service fees if you do direct booking, right? And that's the advantage. So I have not yet met somebody, which is really cool, because I probably should meet somebody that specializes in midterm. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's gonna be your next project right there. You'll probably look into that one.
Too many.
Yeah, for sure. Frank was saying, or Boston Dave said extended say that Frank said there's a few small cities with limits like that, 30 days or so minimum. So they're out there. And Gio was saying, good point. RELO companies are a great source for that and to build that strong relationship with them. So huge stuff. People want to connect with you. Boston Dave's ready to connect with you. I love it. I love that
Let's do it, brother.
it's great. George, before we get into what you are working on model wise and building that out, because we want everybody stay to the end for the crazy stuff that he's been working out. That's it's gold, right? When it comes to short-term rentals. And tell everybody the story that you just went through on closing that short-term rental property. I remember I was scrolling through Facebook and all of a sudden I saw your post and it just sounded like a story of it sounded like crazy. Like you were going through a lot with this one property. Tell everybody, what was that all about? How did you come across that deal? How did you close the deal? What did you close it in? All of that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I came across a deal through a friend of mine, a wholesaler, and she literally just texts me properties every once in a while. And we weren't ready to buy another one until obviously we needed to find the right property. So she sent me this property, I think at the beginning of July or something, right? And maybe at the end of June. And I look at the numbers and then I'm like, okay, well, this one is about 2 minutes from the one that's bringing me $170,000 a year. So I'm like, let me just check it out, right? And it meets all, maybe all but a couple of our pre-screening checklist, right? We build an avatar, essentially is what I'm talking about, right? We have an avatar for each city. Like if we're investing in Galveston, we'll have an avatar for Galveston. It's a property avatar that we build. So, and if you want to invest in Florida, right, we'll build you an avatar for your city, right? And then that avatar is basically the sweet spot property price point, right? And revenue combined, right? It's the one that brings you the best gross rent multiplier or sweet spot multiplier. And if you don't mind, I'll break that down for everyone.
No, please. I wrote that down. I'm like, we got to talk about that. So go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're building an avatar, we're going after a property, well, just like what we did for this one that we just closed, right? And I'm going to go a little bit off topic, okay, of the story of that property. So when we're building an avatar, we go through a process that is called, like, the first part of our process is pre-screening the house, right? It needs to meet a certain checklist, right? And then essentially one of them is the gross rent multiplier. What the gross rent multiplier essentially is a screening metric that we use to figure out how much of our total value is the property going to bring in gross revenue. Okay. So for example, right, you know how they say 1% for long-term, right? 1% a month, right, in rent. So very similar metric for short-term rentals. In short-term rentals, is a minimum of 20% of the total value, right? So if I'm buying a $500,000 house, right? If it doesn't make 20% of 500,000 per year and it grows, right? It exponentially grows also depending on how the market is growing, right? Then I won't go for it. So my property needs to make at least 100 grand. The property we just purchased, right? Our projected numbers were between 100 and 130, but we're going to go all out, right? Because we're going to build out something really, really cool. We're posting the whole thing, as we do it in our Facebook group, or probably my personal profile too, right? So as we build it out, essentially we're gonna show it off, right? So the sweet spot multiplier is another metric that is essentially it's a number, right? So essentially you're taking your total gross annual revenue, right, and you're dividing it by 12. So let's just say my projection is 120, like this particular house we just purchased. Right. So I'm saying, okay, I'm going to do 120K a year. Right. I'm going to take that number and I'm going to divide it by 12 months. Okay. And then when I divide it, I get $10,000 a month, right? For the sake of even numbers. Then I take that and I divide it by my PITI. If my project is 3x or less than 3x, right? So for example, if I am my PITI was $4,000, you take the 10,000 divided by 4,000, that's 2.5, right? I want to be at a 3x minimum. So the highest my PITI is going to be in order for me to create 40 to 50% margins, right, per month, profit margins. So that's how I pre-screen a property. It's very cool, easy process because you can really tell if this is going to work. The only caveat of this is that you have to know how to do the market research so you can identify that gross rental revenue per year. And this pre-screening method, you just do it in your head or throw it in a quick spreadsheet. You take 10,000. If it's not 3x, we don't do it. But this only applies to single family, right? It's not to apartments. It's not it's not to like luxury. Because if you have a property that brings in 20 grand, 25 grand a month, and then you're paying, like 7,000 or 8,000, that's a little bit below 3x, but because your numbers are a little bit larger, you're still going to make some profit, right? So I would exclude not going for a property that's 3x if it was a larger property, like $1 million house. So I would say your price point to utilize this metric is anywhere between $250 price point, right? Any 2-3 bedroom and home, and then 600,000-700,000, right? So that's the two screening metrics, and then the rest is done through like the extensive softwares and then the calculators we built, so that you can just throw in your numbers, right, and then do your costs.
What's that missing link for that meeting, or not only just the meeting, but let's just say that rep that showed up at the conference hands your card now to the next person for that person to say, well, this is interesting. I want to get in touch with Mark, because you didn't talk to that person.
Yeah.
Right. So what did your brand say to that person that wasn't there, that disconnect person? What did it say to them that says, hey, I need to get the meeting? What is that connection?
So I'll just speak a little generically, and if you want me to say the specifics, I can. But what you need and what I needed then, and what we all need is alignment. We need so the perfect world, the thing that I would love to be able to strive for, is to make sure that I say the exact right thing to the person in the exact right moment, in the right way to get them to move forward. That I drop my ad or my piece of content at the exact moment I need to drop it for them. Like this is like utopia. Utopia is that for every single type of person you work with or prospect, or every type of client or customer, or every person in your audience, you would just spoon feed them the exact thing that they need when they need it. Like that would be the perfect thing. And while if we went through and broke down every single type of person, we may have like 100 or 200 or 300 different types of combinations, and that's not achievable. We can certainly align those things better. So I'm talking about philanthropy. I'm talking about strategy. And I'm wowing people, but when they hit my website, At the time, what we said was, we know video. We're a video-centric agency. We will help you leverage video strategically. And what I wish I had done, at least for that moment, was actually drive them to a landing page that said, we know nonprofits, we know philanthropy, like tell the people what they want to hear so they can see themselves and they can go like, oh, these guys work with people like me. Oh, and that's the alignment. What you need to do, and we can get into this, one of the points that we kind of talked about was the three things that are needed for sales. We're kind of touching
3
on
players
that right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to jump into that, or I'll let you lead?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's great. I'm just thinking of like what you just said right there, which was having not only just a landing page, but like when that rep, that person out there that gets that card immediately goes to your site, it's the hook point, right? It's having that hook point out there because everybody has like a website that has all the services and drop downs. What you're saying is nobody even wants to go through all that. They just want to.
No. Not nobody wants to. No one will. You've just touched on the biggest mistake people make, which is this very assumptive approach that like people are going to look for information. They won't, right? That like, people will connect the dots, right? Like I'm in wholesale and honestly, I don't know real estate enough to know what's adjacent to wholesale, but let's say that it's like, oh, I do wholesale and I do rehab or something. I don't know. But you give me 2 examples. What are 2 things that are really close together?
I mean, long-term holds, like landlord-tenant stuff and short-term rentals. I mean,
perfect.
Same category.
So let's say that you wanted to go find a new lending partner to help you acquire companies. And to me, if I was going to go look for a lending partner, I would treat this as any sales or marketing campaign. Like I wouldn't just like go and just bang on doors. When we looked for financing within our business, I treated it as a marketing campaign. Like I developed brochures and I wanted to win the most money at the lowest rate, the fastest with the least amount of paperwork. So let's say you want to go for a lending partner and you're like, oh, we do rentals. It's like, cool. But if you're not explaining the different types of holdings that you have and the different reasons that you may have them in your business, and you're not laying the breadcrumbs, making the story compelling, explaining why maybe you got into both of those things or how they service your business and how they benefit you. Maybe the short term works really well during non-recessionary periods and the other one works really well during recessionary periods. Like if you don't do these things, but go like, lenders know this business. They already know all this stuff. Like you're making too many assumptions. You're assuming they're going to look through this stuff. You're assuming they're going to read paragraphs when people don't read stuff. You're assuming that they'll connect dots that are clear to you because you're in this all the time. None of that stuff happens. Like you need to make stuff super simple. You need to connect a lot of dots and you need to make sure that when people hit it, they can see themselves in what you're showing or who you're speaking to. So the number one mistake that I see beyond like anything strategic, if we're talking about landing pages, if we're talking about websites, if we're talking about videos, the number one mistake people make is it's too generic and it doesn't say anything that anyone else could say in your industry. But frankly, sometimes you can just take these pages and if you close your eyes, you don't even know what industry the people are in. And you're just making too many assumptions that people will somehow find some reason to like you over someone else. And that just doesn't win business.
Right. And Mark, like if you were to say like, what's the catchphrase, right? Like not we do wholesaling or we buy houses or something like that. Cause that's what everybody does, right? They'll put that on the site. We buy homes, different from houses. Cause homes, there's like a feel good to it. Right. What would be like,
see, that's so funny because the reason I thought you went homes is because you might be thinking about apartments versus condos versus, HOAs versus residential versus low unit residential versus high rise. Like the reason why I would use the word homes as a marketer is because it's like, oh, I want to be inclusive of everyone. But that's a perfect example. If you do single family residential, you shouldn't say homes because what does homes mean? Right? Like unless if you're trying to create this like warm, cozy feeling, but you could do that better through photography and through visuals than you ever could through the word you choose. So just say what it is you do.
Right. And so how would you phrase it differently? Right? Whether you're doing rehabbing or Airbnbs, what is just an example?
It's a tactic, right? Man. It's a tactic. So what's our objectives? Where is this living? Who are we speaking to? What do they actually care about? What's the context for getting there? Then I can tell you what the message should be. But again, like I cannot tell you. A standard thing is like, we solve pain point A through unique way B. Like, that's kind of a standard approach. You know, I talked about the gap, right? Like the gap between how awesome you are. So as a, you know, a modern creative agency helping you show up as badass as you really are, right? Like that could be our H1 or headline or whatever on our website if it was for us. But if it's for you, I'm always going to bring it back to strategy, because it's like people always say like, oh, I met with someone this morning who runs this amazing organization, but I went through the whole website and none of it said anything. Like, I don't know anything about them. Even though I went through their entire website, it doesn't say anything. It's just all generic stuff. And
well, they probably didn't have anybody that was actually going to break all that stuff down either. Either they did it themselves or they got what they paid for.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. For sure, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're doing advertising, and see, so I talked about where I went with my agency up to 2016, and then I said I started to change it when it commoditized. In 2017, we became a full service agency, and we went from being specialized to being generic or general. I learned a lot of hard lessons. We didn't pull the pivot off, but we spent 4 years on performance-based advertising. So in Facebook, on IG, in Google platforms, running ads, doing creative, doing campaigns, and all of these things. And so when people would come to us, if you work with any agency, you know, even if you're small, typically they're going to keep a retainer of, let's say, $2,000 or $5,000 or $10,000 a month on top of your ad spend. And I would always tell people, like, as soon as you turn on that ad spend, every day you're spending money. And if those campaigns aren't ROI positive, you're spending money. The hole is getting bigger and you're burning through cash. Now, at a certain point, you can just say, well, we spent $90,000 on learning. But if none of the campaigns over that time is positive, or ROI positive, if it hasn't provided a return, then you've just spent all that money. And it's happening every day. Every day the ads are on, you're spending money, right? So rather than learn that way, why not just take a step back and either hire someone like me or someone like you worked with, or just hire someone who's going to help lead you through it, or take the time. We have a free download, but lots of people have downloads. There's books on this. Like, take the time to figure out who you're speaking to and what you want to say. And we can walk through how to do this. I'll walk you through how to do this very, very easily.
And you mentioned commercial or medical offices. We've got a medical office portfolio, a couple buildings we bought at the tail end of last year that have been very good to us. And that one in particular became a very interesting transaction. If you want to go with that a little later in the show, because there's a lot of moving pieces on that one. It's a fun story. I'd be happy to share that one in detail.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, we're here. We love to hear stuff about that, right? Stories sell, and they tell a really big picture to everything. So go for it.
So this is a little, we're going deep because we got a whole bunch of strategies at play on this one, but it's an absolute super fun story. So this was a 4-unit medical office portfolio here in my backyard. And so what was coming to market was for 4 different buildings. Okay. One portfolio, 4 buildings, and they were all different, meaning the commonality among all of them was there was an orthodontist that owned the properties and an orthodontist that he then occupied all the properties in some degree, but the properties were all over town and they varied wildly in values. So he wanted everything sold at one time. The challenge with bringing a non-uniform portfolio like that to market is you've limited your buyer pool because they're non-uniform, right? Somebody just wants, I want 20 of the same thing, not 4 of different things, right? And so we made an offer. I made an offer. I say we. When I say we, I talk about like this in my office. So, I don't have a partner in my firm at my office, but I always say we collectively. It's a team. We're doing this together. So, just to call that out, how I refer to us. And so we made an offer on the portfolio, and a whole bunch of people liked one particular building in the portfolio. It was the biggest of the building. And as we were coming and making this offer, it turns out that one of the 4 pieces fell out. Seller said, hey, we're going to keep this. We're not going to bring it to market. So now we're down to 3 pieces, 2 single tenant properties, and then 1 property with with two occupants. Okay. A big giant piece of it. So it was about, I'm rounding here because you're taxing me back to last year. It's about $9.3 million. Okay.
Okay.
$9.3 million. And we made the offer on this thing. What I did strategically going into this thing is I knew there was tremendous demand for one of the three. So my plan was to take this portfolio down one piece at a time. And I'll explain that in a second, what I mean by that, and then sell off the biggest of the three. So I put the properties under contract and I wrote 3 purchase agreements. So what I didn't do was write one purchase agreement for one value and name all 3 properties in the purchase agreement. I wrote 3 purchase agreements, 3 different values that I named that totaled 9.3 million. And then I tied them together contractually, meaning the seller's protected knowing that, hey, Neil, you don't get to just take this one property and kill the other 2 contracts. You got to close on all 3. I said, no problem. I'll close on all 3 properties. They just have these values associated with them. Make sense so far?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right.
I'm following.
So what I did was take that one property, the property I knew had the greatest level of demand with it. We had a broker leading this because this property, this whole thing was brought to market through brokers. So what I did was I ended up getting connected with a broker. And again, it's a small city, so I know most of these folks. So I ended up getting connected with a broker who had a buyer for the big deal. So what I did was, cool. I'm gonna sell you that big deal off. We wholesaled that big deal off. And then I agreed to pay the realtor a fixed rate commission on that thing. Okay. Makes sense?
Oh yeah.
And so what I did was all the properties were tied together, all had to close in the same day at the same time. And so since I established the values up front on the way in, I put tremendous value on the big deal, right? And I signed this thing off at, I think we assigned 7.9 million to this deal. 7.9 million to the big deal. I signed it off at 7.9 million. So that means I'm going to make $0, right? So instead of me making dollars and cents on the deal, what ultimately I did was structure it so that when I took the other 2 properties down that I actually wanted to keep, they appraised for $1,040,000 more than what I had agreed to pay for.
Wow. Strategy there.
So what happened when I went to closing, they appraised for $1,040,000 greater than what I agreed to pay for them. I bought the deal with no money down. My lender advanced. My lender funded 100% of my purchase price. So what I agreed to pay, I funded 100% of the purchase price. We net $102,000 after the debt payment. So I put no money into the deal, wholesaled the big thing off, and now we net $102,000 a year after the debt is paid. Right.
Amazing. Hey, that's a masterclass right there, right?
That's a lot of moving pieces there because you got a wholesale deal and then how to properly structure it in the front end, knowing what the intended exit strategy is, and then getting the right lender to fund the deal on the back side. Right.
Yeah, no, I can already tell probably just from the chat box that everybody's just like mind blown from things like that, right? That's strategy that nobody talks about, right? That's stuff that we need a Neil on to talk about. Like, hey, we took down this deal, and this is like an overview of how we did it. And John just commented. He said, "Brilliant strategy." Because this is awesome, Neil. And I'm thinking, like, I wrote down some notes just so you know where my mind's at. I was like, you said 9.3 million. Yeah. And it's like, okay, no problem. But you said 100% backed by lending, right? So getting funding for a deal like that. What is that like? I mean, you didn't say syndication. You didn't say pool money. You said 100% backed. Was that relationship? Was that a proof of funds? Like, what was that when you got into that?
Yeah. So we pulled it down, 9.3 million, 7.9 went out to somebody else. Right. So that left me 1.4 million. Right. So 1.4 million is what I was left with to buy the remaining 2 buildings, which appraised at, $1,040,000 greater than that. And so, your question is, where do you find funding for that? I could have found it in multiple places from a lender standpoint. Thankfully, I've had a lender who I started with on the single family side, and then I morphed my business into the commercial side with him. And, it's building relationship because he knows because we've done so many deals together, largely in the single family side. And then but he also knows how I buy property. Because when I tell him, hey, this thing, we're buying it at X, it's going to appraise at Y. And I've done this long enough to know how these things are going to appraise or where the values really are in the marketplace. And by golly, when you do that time and time again, he knows, oh no, you know what you're doing.
Basic idea and overview. Somebody just starting out like you were, right? Like I love what Mark's saying. I love all the guests that keep talking about Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to wake up tomorrow. I'm done with my 9 to 5. I don't want to do that anymore. I see all these people making $50,000, $60,000 a year cash flow on real estate. Forget the buy and holds. Yeah, we love wholesaling, but like, you know, we want more passive things for our family. Where do we start? What's the first thing we're looking for? Or who are these relationships that we're starting to build with so we can get started in Airbnbs?
Well, you know, the first thing is, and this is what, you know, this is what I learned from Greg, you know, as early as like 2016, 2017, is that it's all about the people that you meet. You know, I can't tell you the number of people that go to networking events and they're like wallflowers, right? You've got to go to networking events strategic in mind, right? So what I mean by that is, you know, when you go to a Yellowbird event, for example, there's 250 people in that room. Okay, well, number one, that's going to happen every month, right? And if you connect with 5 to 10 people every time you go, before too long, you go every month, and what do you see? A familiar face.
Right.
Like, hey, we connected this time before. Let's reconnect. Hey, we connect. I'm always looking for new people to connect with, you know, and I want to get them talking about what they do. You know, it's great to come on the show and to tell everybody, hey, this is what I've done, blah, 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 blah. It's so exciting. Nobody cares about all that stuff when I'm at a networking event.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want them to tell me what they're doing.
Right.
And then I'll piece out a little snippet like, hey, you know, look, I'm in the Airbnb world. You know, if you've ever got any questions about that, you know, just look me up and maybe we'll do lunch. And that's about where I leave it. You know, in this environment, this is great because I can talk and I can, you know, pound my chest. I'm like, this happened and that happened. And, you know, I had this like dark moment, you know, just all these things that don't really come out at a networking event. So that, again, that's one of the skill sets. You know, making the phone calls to put deals together. That's the skill set. All of that has to be learned, right? And there's only one way you're going to learn. You have to see it being done. You know,
like actually watch it, mentor with somebody, or have that mentorship, or just do it.
Right. I mean, is it possible to read a book, get off the book, right, and then just make your first phone call? I mean, it's possible. But you ever seen a barking dog chase a car? What are they going to do when they catch the car? Right? Oh, I got a deal now. Oh my God. What do I do now?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And everybody comes at this, you know, with a different thing. I mean, a seasoned investor, they're whatever. Oh, I got another deal now. Here I go here, send it here. And here's my attorney. Here's this, here's that. Okay. But what you're talking about is the person who's, you know, in the corporate world, got a corporate job, you know, coincidentally enough, my wife asked me, she said, what are you doing? I said, I'm doing anything I can. So I never have to stare at the 4 walls of a cubicle ever again. Right? Like it was such a driving force. I cannot be the only one that's disillusioned by the corporate world.
Oh, I'm sure many people are out there. That's why they want to watch and do this.
I cannot possibly be the only one.
Right.
Okay. So keep your hustle and grind, keep your day job, because, you know, when you go out and you quit your job, the only magical thing happens is that the little bit of income you have stops. So these networking events are at night. They're, you know, so if you have a traditional job or if you work from home, you can go to these networking events and then you can start learning things piece by piece.
Yeah.
And just, you know, have lunch with people and just look for opportunities. Right. You know,
I mean, but when we go to these events, so like people that don't know, like I think I know the answer, right? Like what you're really looking for are the wholesalers too, right? Because they got the off market deals, right? That that they're what they just want to get the assignments, right? But you are the potential buyer, right? You're saying no,
or my 40 clients,
right? But you're going to manage it,
right? Exactly.
Right. So
that's actually how one kind of fell into my lap, where, you know, I was called in for a consult by a real estate agent, and the investor, you know, wasn't too sure about the idea. I showed him the numbers, and he's like, basically it come down to he wasn't comfortable with the risk, because it is a high amount of risk. I've made no compunction about that.
Right.
But during that conversation, because I wanted to make a point, hey man, you need to buy this house or I will. I wanted to stress the point to him that the deal was that good in my mind. Now the agent spoke up and said, "Oh no, if he doesn't buy it, I'm going to buy it." I'm like, "Well, somebody needs to buy it because I want to manage it." All right. So fast forward 2 weeks, I get a call from the agent, because it turns out that the seller wanted the house sold. She didn't want it listed. So she didn't want people traipsing through. She didn't want to go through all the rigmarole. She didn't want to go through inspections, you know, all that stuff. Is this sounding familiar?
Yeah.
So she just picked her price and said, if I can get this price, I will pay X commission. You can put the deal together. And, you know, through networking, I was the one that received that phone call.
Amazing.
And the phone call went like this. So for XYZ reason, I'm not going to buy the house, and I want to offer it to you. This lady will accept, you know, this purchase price, and then you won't have to bid against other buyers. I couldn't sign that contract fast enough. Now, keep in mind, I kind of broke the rule of I'm not supposed to buy any houses, you know, that kind of stuff. And then I had to, you know,
cave in right there.
Well, you know, no, it wasn't caving in. I was like, listen, I had to kind of break it down. And when she said, well, go there and put together the numbers, in my mind, that was okay, I've received the rubber stamp of approval from the home front.
Yeah.
Go there and present the numbers. And I came back with a contract.
Amazing. You did it. Yeah. It made sense.
Well, because I just had an opportunity to buy a house, had a pool, had a hot tub, and I didn't have to bid on it. It was like, if I would pay that price, which I felt was lower than market anyway, then I could just get that home. So I did.
Yeah.
Because the lady selling it did not want a bunch of realtors and people traipsing through it just because of the situation that she was in. She wanted to sell it to get into her place. She just wanted it gone.
Yeah.
But she didn't want it. She didn't want it gone at like 50 cents on the dollar.
Right.
She chose her number that would allow her to move on. And it just worked perfectly.
A buyer doesn't need brand new appliances in the house. Okay. They want it, but they don't need it. They need a house to live in.
Yeah.
They don't need brand new carpeting. They don't need a fresh paint on the walls. They would like to have it, but guess what? They can do it themselves. So where I'm going with all this is that I said, what if I could give you what if I could provide nicer houses? Would you be able to get that kind of down payment? And she goes, yes. And so that's what we started doing, you know, almost 1,000 transactions ago now from the seller financing space, where we would buy the house, we would do some repairs, we'd sell it on seller financing. And back in the early day, we would sell the entire note, and that would be the model that we would do. So that's how I got started, and sort of got lucky a little bit. But I learned a long time ago you can't put your own limit. You can't put your own beliefs in the model, because you'll really do yourself a disservice on what people really will buy and what they'll pay.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying you overprice it, but you know, people go, because a lot of times they might be a roofer, they might be a plumber, they might be a landscaper, they might be a general contractor. I mean, there's a lot of times these houses look better a year after I sold it to them than I did after I did all the full rehab. So,
wow, that says a lot.
That's how we do it. So now we give the buyers what they need, not necessarily what they want, because they can make it the way they want it to be. Okay.
Yeah. Got it. Well, I tell you, Nick, since we've been on,
go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. I know. I'll jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah. Since we've been on, viewership's up. Everybody's trying to get into the Restream room. The room is full on that, so we want to make sure and let everybody know.
We're gonna start charging cover charge, Al. Let's start charging cover to get in here. It's
We'll
before 9 o'clock. Most of the clubs don't charge you if you get in before 9. Let's
Start
help
charging.
everyone out.
No, we want to make sure everybody's watching. And I'll just say, with the yellow thing keeps coming up, room is full. Check it out. If you tune in, or you know other people that are in the room trying to get in, go check it out. It's on Nick's Creative Financing. What's the group, Nick, exactly?
If you're in the private Facebook group, you can get into it and we'll stream it live. So it's just facebook.com/groups/creative dealmaker. And if you're already in that group, we're streaming it live there too, and it's on the screen right there. If you're not, unfortunately, we won't be able to let you in tonight because we have to vet you to get you into the group. But you can get in for the next time. Sorry about that.
There you go. Well, you know what? Now that it's shared, they'll be able to see it even later. But if you're watching out there, make sure you go there. And
let's bring that up real quick. So, I'll talk about the Be the Bank blueprint. So if anybody that wants more information on what we do, our Facebook groups, any of our ebooks and stuff that Eric and myself have done, if you go to bethebankblueprint.com, you can get all that information from there. You can get access to our Facebook channel, YouTube, all of our materials, download our deal or no deal analyzer, which helps you identify deal structuring and how to enter and exit out of deals as we go on. So hopefully that'll be there too. And then
we'll make sure we cover that for sure at the end. We'll make sure we plug everything in. We don't leave anything behind.
That's really the one thing they need more than anything is bethebankblueprint.com, because from there they'll get everything there is, relative to the Creative Dealmaker, the Creative Dealmaker Academy, the cash flow deal machine, our videos, our content, everything. It's all easily accessible from just that one link. So
So you talked about it in the beginning, and it's something, I don't know if we even talked about it backstage, but as the entry point to even getting into creative deal structuring and to creative financing and seller terms, you were mentioning how the wholesale model is the great first step. And that's how a lot of investors start when they get into real estate, right? They start with the investing, and then they jump to different things. They learn the Nick Legamaro methods and how you can really do the seller term stuff, which that's crazy too. I've heard other people do deals where they'll pay, $7,000 down and that's it. They got the title and everything like that. But talk to us about jumping in. So let's start from.
Let's talk about who this is really for. Okay.
Right.
Who is this for? Because what we are really a complementary solution to what people are already doing right now. Whether you're a wholesaler, a fix and flipper, a landlord, a lender, this is all a viable option to what you currently do. Let's talk about wholesalers, for example. Okay, wholesalers, by definition, it's a very transactional process, right? They go out and they negotiate with the seller, direct the seller. What do they ultimately try to do? They try to get the seller to say yes to their cash offer. That's their model. And if they get the seller to say yes, then they try to put an assignment fee on it and tell it to an investor for a profit. But what happens a lot of times, especially in a competitive landscape, what happens when the seller doesn't say yes? What is your plan B? Well, most wholesalers don't have a plan B, Al, right? Well, plan B, and the question they should be asking is, how do you give the seller what they're asking for, not necessarily the seller giving you what you asked them in cash for price. So that's where the creative deal structuring side comes in. So that's part of the Creative Deal Maker, what we teach and what we do. That's one way to acquire, because contrary to popular belief, not all sellers want cash for a property. They just don't.
Right.
Someone want cash flow, especially if you're dealing with the landlord. Okay, let's talk about landlords for a second. Landlords, their main objective, most of the time, they're landlords. Sometimes most of the time by choice, but sometimes, it's forced upon them, right? But the main reason why people are landlords is because it's cash flow. It's a way to generate cash flow. Well, as you said in the intro, we want to focus on being a lien lord, not a landlord. Most people know what a landlord is. A landlord is somebody that owns the property, rents it out, gets cash flow, and they make a profit on it. And basically, the tenant pays down the mortgage. Well, We don't think like landlords. We think like banks. Okay. We want to act, think, and be a bank. And what I mean by that is, what do banks do? Okay. Well, banks don't own anything. They control. All right. There's a reason why if you go downtown Dallas or Phoenix or Los Angeles or Atlanta and you look straight up, you see names of banks at the top of all those big buildings. Okay. So the banks have learned how to do something right. Whether you like banks or you dislike banks is not really the question or the point here. The point is that they make a lot of money by controlling real estate, not by owning. Okay. Because it's a powerful thing called amortization. And if anybody's not aware of what amortization is, they need to really become knowledgeable, because that is the secret sauce in all of this. Okay.
What is amortization? Like,
so amortization is a way that you get paid. So it's all front loaded. Do you have a home? You ever had a home mortgage out?
No, not myself yet.
Not yet. Someday you will.
Not yet. Yeah.
A lot of people probably had. So let's say they have a bank loan from Bank of America, right? Okay. Who owns the house? You or the bank?
Well, it depends on the state, but
you always own it. But yeah, I shouldn't asked an attorney that question. That was a bad move on my part. The individual owns it, but the bank controls it because they have the lien on the property. The property is collateral, right? So when the roof leaks, or the toilet breaks, or the air conditioning goes out, the owner doesn't call the bank. The bank doesn't care. The bank just wants to get paid. As long as you pay the bank, there's no problems. When there is a problem, when you stop paying it, it becomes a problem. Then the banks are going to step in and say, you owe me money, and if you don't pay, I'm gonna take, put you in a default status, and we're gonna figure out how to solve that problem then. Okay, so that's what banks learned a long time ago, that they can control. That's what we want to ultimately do. A lot of people don't even think they can be the bank. Okay, Al, and let's just talk about that for a second. So the seller financing market, the seller financing industry. When I say that, it's like, if you think about, when most people have the mindset when they they have to go to the bank to get a bank loan, right? The bank's gonna have to lend them money to buy whatever they want to buy. It's just not the case. There's a lot of individuals and private companies that will lend on the property. In fact, the seller carry market in this past year was a $27 billion market.
Wow.
That's billion with a B. So that's
you tell me about that.
This is all the mortgages that have been written for residential, land, commercial, whatever, that don't have the name Chase, Wells Fargo, Bank of America on as the lender. They're all individuals or small companies, or companies like what we do. Okay, that's a pretty substantial number, would you not say? $27 billion.
Oh yeah.